I never thought my life would come down to this, counting the last few coins in my pocket while waiting for a bus to nowhere. The night was brutally cold, the kind that gnawed at your bones no matter how many layers you had on. I sat hunched over on a metal bench, my hands shoved deep into my coat pockets, trying to ignore the icy wind cutting through Chicago's deserted streets. The city had always been alive, always moving, but at this hour, in this part of town, it felt like the world had forgotten us. I used to be somebody. Not a millionaire, not a big-shot CEO, but a man who built something. A small but successful business, a life I was proud of. Then came the storm, bad partnerships, a fraudulent investor, and a few too many trusting decisions on my part. Everything crumbled. My house, gone. My savings, drained. My so-called friends, vanished like smoke. My wife, God rest her soul, had passed years ago. And my kids, well, they had their own lives, their own struggles. They thought I was fine, and I was too damn proud to tell them otherwise. Now I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back, a few bucks in my pocket, and a bus ticket to nowhere. The bus pulled up with a wheeze, its headlights cutting through the fog. I climbed on, dropping my last crumpled dollar bill into the machine. The driver barely looked at me, just another lost soul riding the midnight route. Inside, the bus was mostly empty. A few scattered passengers sat hunched over, either asleep or lost in their own misery. I took a seat near the back, stretching my aching legs. That's when I noticed him. A man sat a few rows ahead, bundled in layers of mismatched clothing, his wild beard barely hiding a face that had seen too many hard years. He had a duffel bag beside him, stuffed full of whatever possessions he still clung to. And then, to my surprise, he smirked. Smirked. "Didn't peg you for a last bus kind of guy," he said, turning slightly toward me. I frowned. "Excuse me?" He nodded toward my coat. "That's a nice jacket. Doesn't exactly scream, 'I ride buses at 2 a.m.' I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, well, looks can be deceiving. Ain't that the truth?" He muttered, shaking his head. I should have ignored him. But there was something about him, something in his eyes that didn't match the rough exterior. "What about you?" I found myself asking. "You don't look like you belong here either." He chuckled. "Buddy, I belong everywhere and nowhere." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just stared out the window, watching the city blur past. After a while, he spoke again. "You know what helps on a night like this?" "What?" "A hot cup of coffee." He glanced at me sideways. "You buy, I'll tell you a hell of a story." I almost laughed. Almost. I looked down at the coins in my palm. Barely enough for one cup. But what the hell? Deal. The bus rumbled forward, carrying two strangers toward a conversation neither of us expected. The diner was one of those places that looked like it had been stuck in time since the 70s. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered, as if it couldn't quite make up its mind about staying lit. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and old grease filled the air. I ordered 2 cups of coffee, black, no sugar. Cheapest thing on the menu. When I handed one to the stranger, he grinned. "Didn't peg you for a gambler." "What's risky about coffee?" He took a sip and winced. "You ever had coffee from this place before?" I took a sip. Immediately regretted it. He burst out laughing, and before I knew it, I was chuckling too. "All right," I said, setting my cup down. "You said you had a story." He leaned back, stretching his arms. "Name's Eddie. Walter. Good to meet you, Walter. Now let's see. Where do I start?" He tapped his fingers against the table, thinking. Then with a sigh he said, "Once upon a time, I was a big deal. Finance guy. Numbers, investments, all that high-stakes stuff. People trusted me with their money. A lot of money." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" Eddie let out a low chuckle. "And then I got too smart for my own good. Made a bad call. No, the bad call. 1 minute, I was at the top. Next, I was watching everything burn." His voice was calm, but there was something behind it. Not self-pity. Something heavier. "And you just gave up?" I asked. "Didn't have a choice," Eddie said, staring into his cup. "When the walls start closing in, you either fight or get out." I got out. I studied him. There was something about the way he said it, like a man who had walked away from more than just a job. "And you?" he asked. "What's a guy like you doing on a bus to nowhere?" I hesitated. Then, maybe because I owed him a story for the coffee, I told him everything. The business, the betrayal, the foreclosure. How I had spent the last few weeks bouncing between cheap motels and borrowed couches until I finally ran out of options. Eddie listened without interrupting. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Damn," he said. "You're worse off than me." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Thanks for that confidence boost. Hey, gotta find humor where you can, right?" He smirked, then leaned forward. "Tell me something, Walter. You ever think about starting over?" I scoffed. "With what? Monopoly money?" Eddie's smirk widened. "Nah. With something better, experience." There was a flicker in his eyes, a spark I hadn't seen before. "I got an idea," he said, "and I think you're gonna want in." I stared at him, half amused, half skeptical. What the hell was this guy up to? But for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. I stared at Eddie, half expecting him to start laughing and admit this was some kind of joke. But he just sat there, sipping his terrible diner coffee like he had all the time in the world. "You got an idea?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "That's what I said, didn't I?" Eddie smirked. "Now, before you start thinking I'm about to sell you on some pyramid scheme, hear me out." "Trust me, I'm fresh out of trust," I muttered. Eddie chuckled. "Fair enough. But let me ask you this. What's the one thing people are always getting rid of?" I frowned. "Debt collectors?" He laughed. "Besides that." I thought for a second. "Old furniture, I guess." "Junk." Eddie snapped his fingers. "Bingo. People throw out perfectly good furniture every day. Some of it just needs a little fixing up. We clean it, repair it, flip it for a profit." I let out a sharp laugh. "You want us to become dumpster divers?" "I prefer urban treasure hunters," he said with mock seriousness. "Look, we don't have startup money. We don't have investors. But what we do have is time, skills, and nothing left to lose." I wanted to tell him he was crazy, that I wasn't about to crawl through alleys digging for someone's old chair. But then I thought about my situation. I had spent the past few months waiting. For what? I didn't know. A miracle? A lucky break? None of that had come. The only thing that had come was more bad luck. And here was Eddie, a guy with nothing, offering me something. A shot. A sliver of hope wrapped in a half-baked idea. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's say I'm not totally against this. Where do we start?" Eddie grinned, nodding toward the diner window. "Funny you should ask. Because there's a perfectly good chair sitting by that dumpster over there." I turned my head and sure enough, there was an old wooden chair, scratched up but solid. "You're kidding." "Nope." Eddie stood up, stretching his arms. "Come on, partner. Let's go make our first investment." I sighed, rubbing my face. How the hell had I gone from being a CEO to dumpster diving for chairs at 3 in the morning? And why, despite everything, was I actually considering it? I had always thought success came from hard work, planning, and smart decisions. Turns out, sometimes it comes from pulling a broken chair out of a dumpster at 3 a.m. That first chair? We cleaned it up, sanded it down, tightened the screws, and listed it online. Sold it in 2 days for $70. It wasn't much, but damn, it felt good. Eddie and I kept going. We combed through alleyways, thrift stores, and garage sales, hunting for furniture that just needed a second chance, just like us. I handled the repairs, sanding down scratches, fixing wobbly legs, making things sturdy again. Eddie handled the numbers, negotiating with buyers, figuring out the best way to turn trash into cash. And somehow it worked. Within a month, we had enough to rent a small storage unit to keep our finds. A month after that, we made our first big sale, a refurbished dining table that went for $200. And just like that, we weren't just scraping by. We were building something. Somewhere along the way, something else changed. I started waking up with purpose again. My hands, which had once signed contracts, now worked with tools. My mind, which had been weighed down with regret, was now calculating profit margins. And for the first time in years, I picked up the phone and called my son. Just to check in. He was surprised. So was I. Eddie changed too. He started dressing a little sharper, walking a little straighter. The man who had once called himself a lost cause now carried a notebook full of business ideas. One evening, as we locked up our storage unit, Eddie clapped me on the back. "You know what, Walter?" he said. "We ain't half bad at this. Speak for yourself. My back still hasn't forgiven me for lifting that damn dresser yesterday. Ah, quit whining. You're getting in shape." "Yeah, round is a shape." He laughed, and before I knew it, I was laughing too. A few days later, something happened that neither of us expected. A man pulled up outside our storage unit in a sleek car, stepping out in a tailored suit. He introduced himself as James Callahan, a local business owner. "I've been watching your listings," he said. "You two have an eye for quality. I run a boutique furniture store, and I need suppliers. Interested?" Eddie and I exchanged a look. "You're serious?" I asked. "Dead serious," Callahan said. "I'll pay top dollar for well-restored pieces. You guys in?" I had spent months feeling like the world had kicked me aside. And now, suddenly, opportunity was knocking. I turned to Eddie. He grinned. "Looks like we just got promoted." We shook hands with Callahan, sealing the deal. As we watched his car drive away, Eddie nudged me. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "All of this started because you bought me a cup of coffee." I thought about that for a moment. The night we met, the last few coins in my pocket. A simple act of kindness that had set off a chain reaction neither of us could have predicted. I smiled. "Yeah. Funny how life works, huh?" Eddie nodded. "Yeah. And you know what, Walter?" "What?" "I think we're just getting started." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.